better. So kite, get out kiting, and in smooth air, go to the coast. We're lucky enough to live near the coast. So you can go out to like Steveston, or you can go to Vanier Park, and you can kite. And I think a lot of people don't understand. It's like a free simulator, you know. Like, and you learn pitch control, because when you're on the ground and the glider pitches and you have to put a little brake on, otherwise you get a frontal. That's exactly what's happening in the air. And I have never met someone who looks really good kiting who doesn't actually look somewhat good in the air. So like, almost every other form of aviation would kill for the free simulator we have in kiting. So if you're not using that resource that kiting is, you're really missing out. Yeah, and I like, it's not just me. All the best pilots in the world, the acro guys, they will all say this time and time again. So, and also the other thing is, get out flying. That's by far the most important factor. People talk about, oh, the so-and-so is really talented, or they've got really big balls, or blah, blah, blah. But the reality is that the people who fly well, it's usually because they've been really dedicated and they just go out flying all the time, right? And they, you know, like I have probably somewhere over, I can't, 3,300 hours, you know, and it's just because I spend a lot of time on paragliding launches all over the world trying to get airtime, you know, and you know, even the Kriegels of the world, he wouldn't be the pilot he was if he didn't get out all the time. And also I see it on launch too. I'll see people get out there and they'll show up late and they'll leave early, you know. And you know, I always try to show up early, like, you know, like when you're looking at those apps, you know, like I try to show up early and get up on launch, see the day develop, and as soon as I think I can stay up, I get out there. And almost all the good pilots I know have that kind of attitude. It's like, I want to get out there. They're not the guys waiting for, I'm going to wait for everyone to clear off launch, and then I'm going to launch by myself when the wind's picking up. That's not usually the best way to do it. Get out there as soon as you think you can stay up. You've got some people to fly with, maybe some of the better pilots still to fly with. You might not fly with them all day, but you'll at least get to fly with them for the first bit of the day. If you're one of the guys who shows up at 1 o'clock at Woodside, it's going to be blown out. You know, in summer it could be too windy already. So really think about that kind of like how you plan your day. You know, because I see people sabotage themselves. They show up in the middle of summer at the wrong site. Like, what are you doing on Woodside at 2 in the afternoon in August? You know, it's probably blowing 30 and no one's there, right? And then they're like, oh, I have to drive to Brighton. Yeah, that's probably where you're going to fly to. So try to realize those patterns and, you know, watch the good pilots. If you show up early, you'll see how they're preparing. They might not have time to talk, like, I don't mean to be rude, but if it's a big day at Pemberton, I'll be getting my gear together and I kind of want to go. It's not a good time to get any information out of me more than a really basic question. And it's not, I'm not trying to be a dick, but it's just, it's go time, you know? And if you show up early, you'll get to see this and you'll see what, like, as a newer pilot, you might just want to hear, like, what are me and Peter talking about? Oh yeah, I think we can fly here. Yeah, the RASP said that, blah, blah, blah. And you'll pick up that stuff. If you show up late, you know, you miss all that. And it's super valuable. Like, even as an experienced pilot, I'll go to a new site and I'll try to show up early and I'll talk to the locals, I'll ask some questions. I might think I already even know the answers, right? And because I've maybe read something, or I'm looking at the site and I've looked at the map. But asking the locals, so what happens here in the afternoon? Does it get windy? Just that kind of stuff. Where do you land? Is it always good in that LZ? Those are really basic things that you can try to do.
Which ties in nicely with the mentor program. Everybody, I think, probably has heard about it by now. But the opportunity to be able to just have a casual conversation with somebody who's kind of said, oh, like, you know, yeah, give me a call, even if it's not in person. Facebook, whatever, phone call, text messaging, something like that. That little bit of information can go a long way. So if you're not already, then sign up.
And just to go more into prep a little bit, like, you know, my weather, you know, like obviously the top one around here is the windgrams. You know, and I'll always have a look at a windgram. If you guys haven't read the windgrams, do people want a little bit of looking over at a windgram?
Sure. Yes, definitely.
Cool, because
we were
like
just talking about that this morning. I'm like, what? Yeah. These little paragliders, I don't understand why they are where they are.
I don't understand it at all as well as Peter. Like, there's a lot of information in here, and people like Peter and Andrew start talking, and eventually they lose me, right? But I do understand the basics. The first one is you want to look at like you see where my mouse is? you want to see where it says it was made. This one says 1842 PDT on today's date, so it means it's the recent one. You got to make sure you're not looking at a stale one, right? That can be, we've had some problems lately with the data not being fresh. And just basic stuff, like you want to see the orange and the red dome. Ideally, you would like to see it like a big dome like this. You don't really want to see overhangs. You don't want to see it detached from the ground. That tells you how the instability. You'll see down here it says unstable, and unstable is red, orange, and then this other types of the conditional instability. It'll always look red at the ground on a decent day, right? If you're seeing red way up here, and if it's mushrooming out, red and orange up high, that's usually a sign of instability up high and a lack of a capping inversion. So if you see a day like that, it usually means, hey, it's going to overdevelop, right? And be careful, right? So the actual shape of that orange and red thing, as well as probably the little bit of purple and then this next color, once you get into this kind of like tan color, it's not usually very good. And you can see that's where the paragliders, because they've calculated the sink rate of a paraglider and where they think you're going to get to, right? You almost always do a little better than what the paragliders on the map say. So if I see them here at about 1,000 meters, I'm like, I bet I'll get to 11 or 12, right? And then there's also the wind grams, these little barbs here. So they, you actually see down here, it actually says that tells you what the wind barbs are in kilometers per hour. Keep an eye on that, because in different RASPs in different countries, they can be in knots, they can be in miles, they can be in meters per second. So that information is there about what that is. Like this is a lot of wind, that's 25 Ks at Woodside in the afternoon at launch height. You know, that'll probably be flyable, it'll probably be ridge soarable. The trick will be getting off launch. If it's a little stronger than forecast on launch, that's pretty breezy. So if I was going to try to fly Woodside, I would probably try to be there 11 or 12, get off as it's building and ridge soar for a little bit. It's got a bit of instability. It won't be that fabulous. As the wind comes in, it usually has a tendency to thrash the thermals at Woodside. And if I was going to go flying that day, I'd be like, well, let's see if there's somewhere a little bit less wind exposed. You can see bridle. A little bit less wind here. It's more like 20 and 15. And it's also showing the paragliders getting a little high. Keep in mind this scale doesn't stay exactly the same, right? So for the different sites, the heights are a little different. So you actually have to go and look at the height. And let's go up to sea to sky. Now that is a much better lift bubble. From a totally ideal point of view, I would prefer if it wasn't undercut in here. I would prefer if it was a bit more like kind of a big dome shape. Once it starts getting too big up aloft, that's probably going to be fine. You also see up here, it also predicts cloud, right? And if you start seeing this, let's say the bulbing out was getting more, you would probably start seeing some cloud prediction and maybe even some precip, right? What I'm seeing here that I don't love though, it's high, it looks relatively strong, it looks relatively early. But have a look at the wind, right? We know that Pemberton has this thing called the Whistler Express, and basically means landing in the Pemberton landing zone after about 2 o'clock. You have to be careful, and you might want to go to the Miller Beer Farm because it's not in that confluence of the valleys. Where the Whistler Express basically is a mini phone wind. It comes from Whistler, and Whistler's quite a bit higher. It's like 2,500, and it drops the wind down. It actually descends into Pemberton. And if you've ever been at the Petrocan filling up at like 8 o'clock at night sometimes, it's like howling, right? Like there's dust blowing around, it's hot, it's gusty, it's like, I wouldn't kite a 2-meter paraglider in this thing, you know, right? And I've seen people try to land in that. All they have to do in Pemberton is go away from the LZ, go up towards the Miller Beer Farm, or go towards the Mount Curry Reserve, and land up closer to the lake.
Did you spend half an hour trying to land in the
I spent 3 hours trying to land
summers
in
ago?
The one good thing about it is it's actually quite lifty. So if you realize you're hitting it and people are like, hey, it's going crazy down here, usually if you just run downwind, you can get away from it.
Yeah, but previous nationals, I was trying to fly over it.
Yeah.
Well, that's not a good idea.
Yeah.
Because we watched him. Thermal, he was ridge soaring.
The middle of the valley.
Oh, God.
For an hour.
So this is one of those things that when you're traveling and as a new pilot, you want to ask the locals, like, hey, is there any winds we need to worry about here? And like in Europe, they'll have maps of the valley winds, and they'll have little danger zones marked on them. And like if we look at a map for Fraser Valley, I can show you where the common places that are like, yeah, don't go there. I really like looking, like I'm old school. I hope most people, like the Google Maps are nicely shaded as well as having contours. So most people can probably read this with the heights. But you can see how it's quite wide up here. Woodside sticks out so it gets hit by the wind. This doesn't stick out as much, so Benny doesn't get quite as much of the wind. And Bridle is kind of on this side of the valley, so it's not as exposed as out in the middle like Woodside. You can see how much it narrows. So here's the Bridle Run, right? So here's Bridle Falls, and as you go past Mount Sheen, you get over to Hurling Island. The landing zones kind of disappear, and these twin chutes here, quite long couloir chutes things, come off what we call Ludwig. And once you go past Ludwig, you're probably not coming back, right? It gets quite windy. You can see the valley really narrows down. You can actually land in Laidlaw. This area of Laidlaw is actually quite reasonable to land in. You can see it gets wider just a little bit, and you can go and land where it says like